Okay, welcome. This is Ad Emmen reporting live with an interview that we normally would have done at ISC. And we are here together with Thomas Sterling and Satoshi Matsuoka. And we are here to discuss Exascale supercomputing developments. So another year on the road to Exascale. So welcome Thomas, welcome Satoshi.
I'm happy that you're here and happy that we can talk again.
Okay. So if I look at the past year, well, 2019 was, the second half was not that interesting, I guess, I don't know. But 2020, a lot of things were happening. So Thomas, can you perhaps start with telling what for you were the highlights?
Well, I'm probably not the right person, but the obvious major trends over certainly the last half year and going backwards are, on the downside, the worldwide pandemic with COVID-19, or alternatively SARS-CoV-2 as a different term, and how the world of high-performance computing, and this spans all continents with the possible exception of Antarctica, addressing the means of applying high-performance computing to all aspects of the pandemic, from drug design and understanding the virus itself to the phenomena of distributing how the COVID-19 has been transmitted locally and globally. And on the other hand, and I'm not the right person to say this, is that in the area of Exascale, we as a community are asymptotically converging to something that looks like exaflops in a classic way, but quite possibly, and I now can attribute to Satoshi and his Rican, Mext, his many colleagues, we in fact have possibly achieved Exascale, because as I see a curious phenomenon, as we get closer to exaflops, we find the definition of Exascale is very rapidly becoming richer with a far greater set of different metrics and applications. So it may be premature, but may not, to say that this is the year when we can declare Exascale in terms of operations, not double precision floating point operations, but operations have been achieved. And of course, explicitly giving, once again, credit to Japan for rapidly bringing up Fugaku, which broke over 400 petaflops Rmax. So I'll take those two. There are a number of other events that have occurred, but I will bring those up as appropriate.
Okay, Satoshi, what were your highlights, according to you, the highlights of, or the important points, I must say? It's not really highlights of the past year.
Well, yes, as Thomas alluded to, and we were able to successfully launch Fugaku as scheduled, despite the difficulties as brought on by this coronavirus spread. You know, there were a lot of challenges, logistical challenges, supply chains, and so forth. But there were a lot of heroics that were played with Enrique and also Fujitsu and other partners, and we were able to deliver Fugaku on time. Now, as Thomas said, we like to consider Fugaku as one of the first Exascale machine, not necessarily exaflops, because of course, as Thomas said, we achieved 400 plus petaflops. Of course, we could achieve more. In fact, it was not achieved on the full machine, but we know the maximum theoretical. Even if we achieve the maximum theoretical, we would not reach double precision limp packets of flop. But having said that, two things. One is, of course, on the the new HPC-AI benchmark, which basically computes the same result as you would with LinkPack, but in reduced precision. But of course, you make corrections to achieve 64-bit results. For that benchmark, we achieved 1.4 exaflop. With the same result as you get 64 bits. So that's machine plus the numerical algorithm advances that allowed us to achieve that. But more importantly, I think that Fugaku, even now, as we bring it up, is achieving application performances that people had expected of the Exascale machine. And for Fugaku, the target goal was never achieving #1 on the various benchmarks. We're the first machine to be crowned #1 in essentially all the performance benchmarks. HPC-AI, HPC-AI Top 500, and Graph 500. But again, it was never our goal to achieve #1 on any of them. Rather, our goal was to achieve something 2 orders of magnitude scale speed up over K computer, which was a 10 petaflop machine. So, and then we are achieving that. So in that sense, Fugaku is an Exascale machine, and the excellence and benchmark has achieved is a consequence of meeting up with the objectives we had set out for the machine. That is, again, it was an application first design, not benchmark first design, not the opposite way. And also finally, we gave Thomas COVID-19. Of course, it was a significant potential hazard to our upbringing of the machine. Everybody's locked down. I'm in my private office now. Of course, we're not locked down anymore, but we still encourage remote work. And as a director of the center, you have to set an exemplar. And so that's why I'm in my remote office, my main office, and at the center. I was there yesterday, but today I'm here. And so we were able to. There's a significant world force, coalition of supercomputers that are being deployed to tackle this media crisis that faces a society, and we're getting tangible results from that, and from drug design to transmission to even simulating the economic impact of all these lockdowns and the possible mitigation measures thereof, and which would not have been possible without deployment of these very large machines, and also all the research that's been going on to quickly adapt our simulations and our AI and so forth, our methodologies to cope with the situation. So in some sense, the HPC community, especially large-scale computing, is really proving its worth to a society. I mean, COVID-19 is really bad, no question about that. But it is allowing us, the community, to really prove its worth, that it is something important, and even in these immediate needs, not just long-term scientific research.
Your presentation, at your keynote, your very nice keynote, you give some examples about how COVID-19 research catched up and how centers were working together. Can you comment on that?
Yes, please. And let me return initially to Japan and to the operation that Satoshi and other colleagues there are providing leadership in 2 different ways. First, bringing resources together and making them almost instantaneously available to researchers who have ideas and ways to do it, removing the bureaucracy that ordinarily is engaged, providing a fast track. And the other dimension, and I should add to that, bringing a diversity of different machines connected to their internet system. Satoshi will tell us, remind us of what that total aggregate is called. And as I got the numbers, and these may be outdated, at least an aggregate of over 200 petaflops using tier 2 machines, and then add to that the tier 1 machine Fugaku which is approaching exascale by various different metrics. So that's one dimension. The other dimension is the diversity and the singular competence of the research itself. The diversity in areas of microbiology, in data analysis and testing, the combining of HPC and AI as mutually supportive tools, looking at the crisis, as Satoshi put it, and at the global scale and how it's transmitted, and very much at the local scale, trying to develop the drug or drug opportunities using computing to do that. Satoshi can add to that, but it's a very rich, it's a very complete attack or campaign against this crisis. In the U.S., I referred to several of our national laboratories, and I'll repeat them. The Texas Advanced Computing Center in Austin, Texas, which is part of the University of Texas at Austin, NCSA in Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and that's part of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. That, by the way, is the first is run by our colleague and friend Dan Stanzione, and the latter, Bill Gropp, is now chairing that. And then the Department of Energy Labs, and I'm only touching on a few. Oak Ridge National Lab, I interacted with Barney McCabe, who's the chief scientist there, and with Argonne National Lab, interacting with some of the colleagues, Rick Stevens, Ian Foster, and so forth there. There are many other universities that are doing smaller amounts of work, but I can take pride in at least how our professional and our computer systems are being brought to bear. And like Satoshi, like his colleagues, we have developed a fast track method, even at points where something could be turned around in 3 days. And then in Europe, we, just to mention too, is the Jülich Computing Center with Thomas Lippert and my friend Bernd Moore, and others who have identified very similar approaches to expediting the research and the kinds of research that are being done very quickly. And maybe finally, at Lugano in Switzerland, our colleague Thomas Schultes, who runs that, is brought their first-tier machines to apply, and are using both they and Jülich are using the PRACE infrastructure for rapidly guiding and connecting the researchers and the research problems to the computers and the computing capability. And I know there are others. I regret I did not have data of our colleagues in China. I can assume that they and others are doing similar things.
Yeah, there was, for instance, also Saudi Arabia at KAUST, where they are using 15% or something from Xianin, but and there were other examples indeed.
Yeah, at KAUST, I didn't have a chance to chat with David Keyes, with apologies, David, but I understand that their facilities and their research capabilities. I should make that one other point, and I'm sure this is true in Kobe. It's not just providing the machines or doing the bureaucracy. It is that these different centers are also providing expertise, hands-on expertise in the programming and debugging and optimizations by experts in the field to help the researchers rapidly get their models or data running and being analyzed.
Yeah. Satoshi, can you perhaps tell, does it really help? Does it really lead to research that now can be done faster and that there are results which otherwise would have taken longer?
Yes. For example, firstly, to answer to Thomas's earlier question, there are two programs we're running in Japan. One is the Tier 1, the Fugaku program, and the second is the Tier 2, the rest of the so-called HPC-AI, which is our race or
HPC-AI. I'm sorry, I forgot those.
Exceed equivalent, coalition of supercomputing centers. And the Tier 2 program is basically, because these machines are by definition operational. So basically they are fast tracking, as Thomas said, from application to acceptance. It's about a week delay, which is significantly shorter compared to normal circumstances. Fugaku was a little different because Fugaku is not officially deployed yet. In fact, we're still in the midst of development, although we have all the machines inside. In fact, when we started the program, not all the nodes were inside our premise. It only came in, the last boxes came in May 13th. But even in March, of course, we had significant resource already on the floor and being tested. And we were getting ready for some of the early test users. And then this whole COVID-19 struck, and it became pretty clear that all this tremendous resource, if fully deployed, is several times bigger than the entire Japanese HPC capability. Even that partially would be put to good use. So we discussed with the ministry, we discussed with stakeholders, we discussed with scientists to basically say, can we do this? And you would think there would be some pushbacks from people, for example, other early access users who obviously would be compromised, or from companies whose deployment plans may be compromised. There are all these sacrifices people have to make. So you expect some pushback, and of course, from the ministry, because ministries are usually very bureaucratic about this, and being on that flagship machine, you have to be very politically sensitive and all that. But in the end, everybody thought it was a good idea. Everybody collaborated, no complaints, people were gung-ho, and we quickly set up the program, set up the procedure, set people up the machine, and of course, as Thomas said, we provided priority expertise of our operations and tuning teams to these scientists, and they're up and running, and that's and the combined the maximum combined capability is somewhere around depends on time of the day. Sometimes they can't get all the resources, sometimes they can, but it's in the order of at least a few hundred petaflops peak if people deployed, exploit the resource in its entirety. Of course, it's very hard to do that. Then a question about regarding ad, and is it really helping? Yes, by all means, yes. Because many of the simulations, especially on Fugaku, the ones on Tier 2 machines are smaller, although some same people may be running on. There are about 12 of them, I think, right now. That's the last I counted. On Fugaku, there's five projects. But the ones on Tier 2 machines are obviously smaller. And but the Tier 1, so Fugaku had to be something that would be worthwhile running on Fugaku. And but scientists, the application people, the teams basically are exploiting the machine to a great extent, in a way such that it would not have been possible to get any of the results in meaningful time in the existing infrastructure, like or predecessor K computer. So, for example, one of the molecular simulations. This is first principle molecular orbital calculation using what's called FMO, which is a highly parallel Schrödinger equations calculations using the what's called the FMO method. They are reporting over 100 times speed up, running the same code on K as opposed to Fugaku in a reasonable capacity they can usually obtain. So they have cut down their compute time from a few months to just few hours. Okay. And so this is giving them considerable advantage in terms of turnaround time, being able to explore the nature of these the virus, to study the nature of viruses. the other example I can give is, so there's another research group that's doing all sort of all, taking existing drugs to see if they are effective against these drug targets. But even in Japan, there are about 2,100 approved drugs. So in K, it would have been infeasible to just go and try them all. In fact, the methods that the researchers are using is based on first principle molecular dynamics. So again, this is not as expensive as orbital, but molecular dynamics is still very expensive. So it would have been very difficult to conduct this on a small machine, because they were given this huge resource of Yaku. They could just sweep at least for a few of the targets. They were able to do the complete sweep, and they were able to identify some drugs that are effective, which in some of the trials or in vitro experiments, people have thought it could be effective, but that they didn't have any evidence or knowledge as to why, or the effectiveness or the potential effectiveness. But now it's been proven that some of these drugs have really high affinity to attach to the targets, and these are not even antiviral drugs. They're completely different drugs. But it turns out that these may be effective. And again, this was already published, but these were sort of more just done based on empirical experiments. But now we have scientific evidence to prove that this may be effective, because we see this behavior at the molecular level. And then, of course, there's we are doing lots of analysis on aerosol and droplet dispersions, because people cough, people wearing masks, not wearing masks. What's the social distance? How do we do the ventilation, room ventilation? Are crowded trains dangerous? All these, there are lots of issues. What are the preventive measures? How can restaurants reopen with these measures? Do they have to keep distance, or can they put shields? How high the shield should be? There are all these things we simply don't know. Again, we're running extensive sets of simulations, built by air conditioning and also construction companies, and we're finding some very meaningful results, and that's leading to some government guidelines with respect to these coronavirus mitigation measures in a social setting, like how high do you want these shields, these partitions to be, for example. So
Yeah.
And finally, I think the rapidness. It's only been like a couple months since we started this. The whole program started beginning of April. Both programs started beginning of April. And but we're getting some really tangible, meaningful scientific results, which are in some ways groundbreaking. Well, at least something that's really, really useful. And in some cases, there was some serendipitous, I would say, serendipitous transformation. Just like you apply a different drug, totally different drug to which happened to be effective to coronavirus. The same thing is happening to these simulations themselves as well. So, for example, this droplet and aerosol simulation. This was already mentioned in my COVID-19 talk that I see. The team that's doing this, they were experts in engine, internal combustion engines, and they were simulating lots of stuff, including the fuel injectors. So you have a fuel injector, you spray gasoline into the engine, and of course it combusts it, and then it evaporates it, and then you light it up and it explodes, and that's how engines work. But they found that the same physics apply to droplets and air as well, because it's liquid, micro droplets of liquid in air. So they quickly transferred their methodologies to adapt to the new parameters. And they put in some new elements, like they put in the actual coronavirus counts into the droplets and so forth. And then, of course, they worked with the experts in the area, and they quickly came up with these simulation results. So it's, in some sense, it was serendipitous. A team that has been working on a totally different subject just happened to have the right solutions to mitigate coronavirus. So I found that very fascinating. In some cases, of course, people have been working for years on things like drug design and so forth. But even then, people are trying these new methods, which is giving them some serendipitous results, which were not expected. And then there's even a factor of just totally serendipitous different branches of science. And again, it's really interesting that this is all being driven by this high-performance computing and all the research that's been done. It's been very impressive, few months that we are actually doing the right science and for the mankind that's useful.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see that all, and I would also be interested, especially in the droplet research, because I want to know whether I can travel safely by train or not. So anyway, but let's go back to the systems. Thomas, you mentioned in your talk that you see 3 types of systems in the, let's say, top 500. The very big ones, the big ones, and basically all the rest. How do you see the usability of those 3 types, and can you tell a little bit more about that?
Certainly. First, let me say that that work, which has gone on for a number of years with my colleagues, is based on the very fine data that Eric Strohmeyer of Lawrence Berkeley National Lab had been preparing, presenting for literally decades. And this, of course, includes Jack Bengera and Horst Simon, and up until recent years, the late Hans Mauer. So we're mining this, and the key outcome of that miner study is that the supercomputing availability is not evenly divided across the 2 orders of magnitude performance range, as you might anticipate from the original presentation curve, from the number 1 machine down to the number 500 machine. Again, that's roughly, and it changes slightly, 2 orders of magnitude, and that's been remarkably steady over the more than 2 decades. What instead we found is that these, and this is a popular thing, right? These systems really clustered. And I know they're clustered systems in many cases, but they seem to be either falling into what category we'll refer to as mainstream. One other is leadership, and then there's this third area between the two. Not very many machines in that area, and I don't think we've ever come up with a decent term for that. The important takeout is that HPC, the field, both in terms of product development and in application usage, tends to fall in these 3 areas. More than 90% of all the machines on the top 500 seem to be within a factor of 4 of the number top 500, the 500, 500th machine. So most of us, not Satoshi and a few special people, but most of us work in that lower few percentile of peak capacity that's provided. We've also found that the leadership machines, which get a lot of the press, and deservedly so, such as Fugaku, the total number of machines is always within the top 10. And that would have surprised me. They don't reach into the top 20. And then there's these intermediate machines where, such as the one we have at Indiana University, we're putting into place a new Cray Shasta machine, and that's just beginning to be at this fairly rapid increase, and that's only across at most 10 to 15 of those machines. What this means is that we have a community that serves very different operating points. We should acknowledge that, and we should apply them, both support them in terms of software tools and environments where people really need confidence in what they're using, because that's where most of the machine. And then as Kobe is doing, and our friends at Ulick, et cetera, show how by really stretching the capabilities that we can in fact do remarkable things otherwise. So the one message is there really are three classes of machines, and they do cluster tightly. And the other is that this has been a steady state condition for well over 2 decades. So we can rely on the reality of it. It doesn't mean that machines haven't been changing. Others have done this. We found that a number 1 machine 8 years from then would be a number 500 machine if they're kept on that long.
Okay, can you comment on that, Satoshi?
Yeah, it's quite interesting observation. Of course, I'll also look at Eric's data since Thomas's talk and so forth. When we started the Exascale endeavor, maybe over 10 or even over 10 years ago, there were a lot of questions as to whether we would have some tangible applications that we running on these machines. Maybe not the whole machine, but at least even so, this even a small portion of such a machine would be so humongous. They would be using hundreds of thousands of cores. On a Fugaku, 100,000 core job is standard. It's it's my times have changed, and there are a lot of questions whether it would be viable. But as Thomas points out, what's interesting thing Thomas points out is things just there have been some changes. I think there are more bigger machines. There's more concentration of the performance on bigger machines and so forth. But by and large, the applications have shifted. There are new applications coming in, obviously. But people have found uses for these big machines, and the applications that have been running on these big machines are now shifted to lower tier machines and so forth. So this continued performance and the scale of the machine growing, this continued path. I wouldn't say without effort. Of course, there are a lot of efforts involved, but still continue to demonstrate the utility of these machines for a wide range of applications. So here we feel again, 10 years ago, some people, even some of the experts, I wouldn't name them, but people who are actually building Exascale machines now, planning Exascale machines now, even said, well, we only have 1 or 2 credible applications in Exascale, so we need to have some justification. So there are some people saying, but now, people don't say that. We do have a variety of credible applications that can benefit from these large machines, and of course this downstream to small machines over time. So that's pretty amazing. We've been able to not just sustain the growth of the machine, but the growth of the applications. Keep pace with the applications, keeping pace with the growth of the performance. That's pretty amazing. The second thing is one of the reasons why China has such a dominance, at least in terms of the number of units, in is number of machines, the country share, or vendor share, is because they put up all these machines, which we don't know if they're really supercomputers, but they're actually in the cloud, but they do so anyhow, or in some in-house machine, but they do so that they put them on anyhow. Whereas in the U.S. or in Japan, these private entities may not be listed these machines. And so one demonstration of this was Microsoft just few weeks prior to ISC, announced that they have put together this very large machine, which is the GPU based. But in terms of raw performance, it really within top 5, other than the top 100 list. And I think some of the press reports that they have more than 10,000 GPUs and so forth. And that's the so their claim was obviously substantiated by the scale of the machine. Of course, they're using this mostly for their AI stuff, but probably using for others. And I know other companies that actually have similar type of capabilities. They don't just announce them. And these types of very large infrastructures making their way into private sectors is actually not represented on the top, but they are definitely there. And actually, that's driving the market, because HPC market is increasing by a much higher percentage than the other branches of IT. And some of these are reflected on the top 500, some are not. And but obviously, the companies are not, are keenly aware that these computing capabilities are very credible instruments to drive their business. So there used to be, for these bigger machines, what Thomas calls the flagship, or maybe even a second tier, but sort of the bigger cluster, 2 top clustered machine. We used to say most of the industries in the lower tier, the lower cluster. But now we have industries putting up these machines, so they are becoming alternative force other than the countries competing against each other, like with big government-sponsored machines like Fugaku or Summit or Sierra or Yankee and so forth. But now we have private sectors who are coming in and putting up their big machines, and that's becoming something not necessarily reflected on the top 500, but hopefully we can capture by some of these.
Okay. Yeah, for instance, you also see that in the top 10 there are now 2 machines in industry, one from INA and one from NVIDIA itself. So
yeah, some of them, right, the listed machine, but some don't, and for competitive reasons. But they're certainly there. The big machines are in the industry.
Yeah. Okay. Can we talk a little bit architecture? So, Thomas, can you start with telling what you see there?
Yes, so I would say that there are 2 important trends, and I'm going to once again start with Fugaku. So I feel ill prepared, but Satoshi will correct me. This may be an exaggeration, but I think the deployment, and especially the rapid deployment of Fugaku, reminds me of the Earth simulator moment. When that's a long time ago, right? I think you and I were in Santorini. I may be wrong.
I was in high school.
Oh dear. Earth simulator really escaped from the trap of roughly small increments in changes, and with the first major machine to hit 40 teraflops. I was giving a keynote address at Osaka, I may have that wrong, University in Shenzhen. But this is equally important. We have to give credit, among other things, to the work of Fujitsu. And they are the first to bring a machine based on ARM processors to a large-scale machine. This has been discussed for years and years, principally in Europe, certainly interest in the US, but the Fugaku is a major machine. But in addition to that, of course, is their own custom accelerator. SVE are the letters that come to mind that are bringing. And finally, the Fugaku machine is really good interconnection technologies and techniques. This was also true, in my opinion, with K, where there was a lot of bandwidth. And that bandwidth really helped Kei, and I presume will on Fugaku, be able to do many other problems and simply and do them well, even record-breaking, than most of the machines, because of the tight coupling, the very high bandwidth, and frankly, the just exceptional engineering that these machines have. So, and I'm sure Satoshi can add to that, but let me just say one other thing that is happening. I didn't have much time to talk about this in my keynote, but we are beginning to see traction and interest in heterogeneous computing beyond the bimodal GPU plus a group of CPU, multi-core CPU chips in a particular node and then tied together to a network. And I only really know the work that's going on in the US, but there are literally dozens of special purpose chips that are being developed right now, principally, but not uniquely, by startup companies to expedite at much lower cost, lower energy, and higher reliability. And those are important points for these cases in the areas of what we're calling AI today. We discussed this a year or two ago to bring the price down so that many more problems can be addressed. But before that, there was effort to do a number of startup special purpose or domain specific chips for Bitcoin and other things. So there is now expanding, building on what makes a GPU almost like general purpose with additional added accelerators, most of which will die as in most startups, but some of which will not, and even the ones that die will point the way towards future. Now, our friends at Oak Ridge have been a big supporter of heterogeneous computing. I myself have tended to try to push back on that, but to be honest, I am myself developing a domain-specific machine that is more memory intensive. So I guess I have swallowed my pride and looked at it. I would say that I would have expected more hard development out of Europe by now than I have seen. They certainly have the capability, and I'm expecting to see more out of China, quite possibly next year, as this. Of course, as Satoshi has pointed out, Fugaku's got legs, and we'll be seeing much more interesting numbers from them. So one final example of domain specific, which I did mention in my presentation, was the IBM chip, the neuromorphic computing chip, with something in excess of 5 billion transistors. It's a spiking model of neuromorphic, but it's pure digital. And by some metric, which I haven't fully internalized, it incorporates 1 million neurons by whatever definition that is. So the good news is that there are applications in pattern matching and associative searching and even planning some NP-hard problems and putting the games aside. That's the good news for this, and I look forward to seeing those results. The bad news is that we're building a machine where we don't even really understand the paradigm of what thinking is, and ultimately these are intended to move and to provide the mechanism or the appearance of thinking in rocks, as my friends would say. So I just cite that as an interesting example, if for no other reason, simply the scale. It's like the second largest chip, and it is scalable. Let me turn it over to Satoshi.
Yeah, well, thank you for all the compliments, Thomas. I think it was a very intensive 10 years work between Fujitsu and Rika, and I was involved from day one and kind of involved in various manners through the whole way. Now, of course, I'm responsible for it. So I know a lot of the gory details of how the project had gone. And there were a lot of crises in between, and I know how we overcame them. And in the end, in some ways, in the end, I think we did the right thing, and we built a machine that we had anticipated, by and large, anticipated 10 years ago, actually. So it gives us a really good feeling that what we had envisioned for what Exascale machine would look like, we had actually realized. That was in 2018. U.S. the Darker report. It was an R report we had written around the same time. Now, but of course, it was done with lots of very pristine engineering. And what sets Fugaku apart from K Computer, of course, there are lots of similarities because there are designs that we have inherited. For example, what Thomas mentioned with the interconnect. Certainly, it's an evolution of a tofu network that was in K, that's involved into tofu E. It has some more features, is faster and so forth. But the network in K was ultra fast to begin with, so there weren't. So it wasn't. It was something that we inherited with this generation. On the other hand, there were lots of shortcomings in K. For example, the chip itself was only marginally competitive to, let's say, other CPUs at the time. We did lots of comparative benchmarks against more popular CPUs, and we found they were not a very large performance advantage. Then you say, why the point? Why don't you just go buy off the shelf? We found that the power profile was not, we had to make significant improvements. In fact, we didn't say it like that at the time, but we need to make something like almost like GPU level power efficiency metric in order to reach our target goal of building a machine within this power envelope and space and cost and so forth. And that was, again, very, very difficult target because K was sort of, again, the power efficiency of K was sort of nominal, again, compared to other processors. So had to make a leap there. And then we had to do it in with the constraint that it's general purpose. We couldn't rely. We looked at the profile of many applications, except for vectorization, which we knew very well, because and also Intel with the AVX, which is vectorization. GPUs are vectors, and we have classic vector machine, including Ursula. So we know how to vector. So vectorization is an acceleration technology we know very well. So that's one thing we could use, but we couldn't use anything else from a compute point of view. So that was a big challenge because other than that, we had to build a general purpose processor, which would have a very large soft ecosystem. And that's why we picked ARM. And of course, there was a big fight whether to continue with Spark or to adopt ARM, because of course there's a whole that's a complete switch over the software rules tool chain for Fujitsu, but we won out. But again, having these three elements coincide, this ultimate, extreme high performance, extreme high efficiency, and the extremely general purpose. So general purpose you can run on Windows and Word at that level of generality was a very, very tough goal to achieve. But I'm very happy to say we've done that. So Fugaku's value is not just with the performance, it's the it's the flexibility and generality. So that's good. Now, so the question, so that's the machine we have here today, and we demonstrated that. And there are lots of big GPU machines out there. And Thomas said GPUs are not quite, but almost, they're very, very general purpose, right? They're not as general purpose as a CPU, but there's abundant software stack, we have to appreciate and honor and applaud the efforts of companies like NVIDIA who's spending more money, I think, in enriching the software ecosystem than putting in the hardware. I mean, that's, again, they've learned the lesson of how computer architectures die, and then and they're doing all they can to, not just to rest on the performance advantage, but to enrich the software system ecosystem people can actually use it. So GPU systems are still very dominant in the top, and for very good reason. And people now have a choice of either going to completely general purpose basic FX, or get a little bit of more performance advantage, or in some cases it's easy to program these parallel architectures for some problems rather than vectorization. So GPUs are not all that bad to program for some apps, so then they go the GPU way, and that's perfectly sensible. So those are the two major types of computing paradigms we have right now. Now, so the question, where do we go from here? And so we've been thinking really deeply about this for the past several years, even before Fujaki was complete. But the good news is, as we are getting these new machines on the floor and we're measuring them and being able to program them, and these are good machines. They're exploiting, the like new Ampere GPU, both Volta and Ampere GPU. They're really pristine architecture. They're really well designed. They have really high efficiency. So they're not like old GPUs. They're really high efficient, well designed, really very well designed, engineered software. And so is Exascale. They're not like something 5, which had really poor efficiency, very badly designed. And that's a consequence of that. But the Exascale from a very high altitude may look very similar, but actually efficiency of engineering of the chip is totally different. So people have very good choices. But now we have them, and we have the applications, and we have studied heterogeneous computing for a long time. I have a feeling that we are starting to get a really good grasp of the positives and negatives and what we can expect to see and what we hope to see, but we may not see yet. So I can't really go into the details of the one. Some are still a research secret, but even compared to 10 years ago, when people said heterogeneous computing, I think we're getting a really good understanding of the strengths and weaknesses, and the limits and the possibilities and limitations of heterogeneous computing, from the architectural standpoint, from the performance standpoint, from transistor standpoint, all the hardware devices stuff, and the programming standpoint. And so it's very exciting times, because now, in the past we said heterogeneous computing was ready to go, but it was more of a blanket statement, I think. But now that we have these artifacts and that we have much deeper understanding, we're at a point where we have to be, as we design the next generation machine beyond machines like Fujaki, have to be really cognizant of the selection of heterogeneity that we put into the system, what we should not put into the system because they're not useful. So we're approaching that. We're actually at that approaching, or even at that point for something. That's on one hand, it's quite interesting. On the other hand, it tells you that we're sort of transcending from a phase of this let all the flowers bloom, heterogeneous computing base, to more mature, a little bit more mature, sort of on the path to more, I would say, more comprehensive, more general, more widespread public deployment of these. So, and again, there are various forces at play. Your smartphone is actually a heterogeneous monster. Any of your latest smartphone has a whole bunch of heterogeneous components, so it's already there. But is it applicable to more general purpose machines like supercomputers or machines in the cloud? People are not quite sure. because these smartphones have very well-defined workloads, whereas on these more general-purpose and very large-scale systems, they may not. So it's very exciting times where we go.
Okay. Yeah, in Europe, for instance, you see the EPI development, European Processor Initiative, where they try to put a platform on a chip with the ARM chip as the core, and then you can add a RISC-V processor as accelerator, and you can add FPGA, etc. Is that part of the heterogeneity, or is that not what you're pointing at?
Well, I think it's more to do with the fundamentals of exactly identifying what we are trying to compute first, exactly what these application algorithms are trying to compute versus what are the implications in terms of the transistor budgets and wirings and what's required, and what are the benefits and what are the budgets required in terms of power and so forth. So all these are starting to be much more comprehensively linked together in the engineering fashion, rather than just saying, yeah, we're going to go heterogeneous and we'll slap on FPGA, that's good. So in some sense we're maturing, but it's a very delicate procedure, because we have to have an exact understanding of what even microscopic understanding of what we're trying to compute. And in some cases, some of the folklores of heterogeneous computing in some of our research we're starting to really disprove as not being true in real applications. So providing a platform, yes, that's a good measure because you can adapt. But that's not a panacea, that's just for a platform. What's really important is what you put in.
Yeah.
What you put in there, having a good understanding of what you put in there. And that's where I think the understanding is, we're starting to really understand the problem.
Okay. Do you have anything to comment on that, Thomas? Or?
Well, briefly, first of all, I agree, of course, with Satoshi. And a very important thing, he didn't quite use the word, but is intrinsic to everything he's just said, and that the development of these leadership machines that will serve for a long time and be a significant budget item must be done responsibly. And responsibly means that they have to be advanced, but they have to be advanced based on foundational analysis and simulation, so that you don't end up with, a mistake machine. So I truly respect that, and that's also what's being done by HPE and/or their new division, Cray. However, and now I'll go out on a limb for a moment, also recognize, and by the way, this is consistent with the concerns that Satoshi had, but maybe different methodology, is to recognize that that we are at a stage. It's amazing we've gotten through this whole discussion, and not once have we said end of Moore's law. Because maybe
that word yet.
What did he say? I didn't hear it. Okay.
You want to repeat it, Satoshi?
End of Moore's law.
Yes.
End of Moore's law. Okay.
Yeah, end of Moore's law.
Right. We've avoided cliches very nicely here. I credit all of us. But the fact is that there are alternative means of organizations of elements that may at least liberate our future designs, again, within the scope of responsibility that Satoshi is talking about, to extract opportunities within the design space and the limitations of the technologies to get significant advantages that we're not yet doing because of our intrinsic underlying assumptions. And the one I will mention, and I'm not going to advocate it, I just want to bring it to attention, is that we continue to base our decades of machines on the underlying features and factors of the von Neumann paradigm, of the von Neumann model, although the derivatives certainly would seem to be much changed from the original ones, many of the specific constraints that were optimal in the first few decades have become less so now. We continued this because of the exponential growth of semiconductor technology, but we're going over the top of that knee of the curve. So I'm expecting that future, if there are accelerators, they won't just be numeric, moving the bits around in order to minimize the succession of latencies between serial ALUs, but rather that they will reassess the potential organizations that may be done differently. This is not imminent. I'll throw out neuromorphic computing simply as an example, and a more far out example might be quantum computing, but I'm not in the position to argue that this time. So I simply want to say that there is potential done professionally and responsibly for the kinds of studies that Satoshi is talking about that may lead us beyond the conventional and may move us into new optimality spaces of design. But I'll leave it there.
Okay. I think we have discussed applications, architecture, the current status. So if that's fine, then we have only one topic left, and that is the future. Where will we be in 1 year from now? Will we have Exascale, and where will we have Exascale? Will the way that we do research have been changed? Definitely because of COVID. So where will we be in 1 year from now? And of course, I hope that we will be in Frankfurt, but that's just part of the answer.
I want my German beer.
Yeah.
So
So Thomas.
Oh my God, yes, better.
Yes, of course. Yeah. Thomas, can you start or?
Yeah, 1 year from now.
Yeah.
Satoshi and his team, Riken and Fujitsu and so forth, will be completing the deployment of their machine and exercising it. And I won't be at all surprised if it continues to be number one on the list. Japanese machines tend to stay up there. It's a beautiful piece of engineering, and so it gives us a spotlight on the 1 year time frame. In the U.S., we are expecting to have anywhere from 1 to 3 machines that, in some sense, qualify as exascale or exaflops. There is the background program, the Exascale Computing Project, which isn't producing a machine, but is producing technology, hardware and software and methodologies to contribute to others. There is the Aurora 21 machine that will be or should be deployed at Argonne National Lab that, according to U.S. Programs right now, is expected to be the U.S.'s first exaflops RMAX machine, and very well could be operating by then. And then there are at least 2 other machines within the U.S. In the 1 to 2 exaflops range RMAX that are being planned for Oak Ridge National Labs and for Lawrence Livermore National Labs. And these are planned out. I don't know if they either or both will be online. The next time we speak, I hope we speak in Frankfurt. And for me, the Chinese are a secret. I don't know what their next delivery will be. I've only heard rumors, and I'm not going to repeat them because they're unsubstantiated. And Europe, there's not a sense that a leading machine, a new leading machine, will emerge within the narrow time space of 1 year. And then I'll simply, at the risk of redundancy, repeat that I think we're going to see some new special purpose chips that are optimized for certain kinds of computing. The results from them will be interesting. I'm not going to claim whether they will succeed or not, but I think it will enrich in the space of consideration. And finally, there is, although it hasn't been mentioned much, there is continuing progress, incremental, in the areas of both neuromorphic and quantum computing. And I look forward to saying more about that. And Japan is certainly playing a major role in the quantum area. Satoshi, I'm less familiar with the work going on in your country in neuromorphic. So those would be my closing comments.
Okay, Satoshi.
Okay, so my crystal ball would be, of course, as Thomas mentioned, Raku will be stable, operational by then, and we may actually see more details of the U.S. Exascale machines. We don't really know exactly when they'll be actually deployed into this full entity, but at least hopefully we can see more details. I mean, they're being slowly revealed, but they're not. We, of course, in background, we know some details, but they're not public. Many of the details are not public yet. And maybe we may or may not see the Chinese machines. We will see. They used to be much more open, but of course, for various political reasons, one or the other, they are much more closed now as they've been in the past. So, they're quite mysterious. I'm sure they're working on various machines. It's just unknown when they will actually be deployed because it's not easy. For example, for Fugaku, the first chip came out in 2018, May of 2018. And then it takes 2 years for that to deploy the full machine. I mean, that's the magnitude of the efforts that's required from a machine from a chip that booted Linux from day one. There were a few bugs, of course, but basically booted a large operating system from day one in A0 state, still to the full machine, building the full machine. It has taken 2 years, and still take another year to a point. So it's a huge endeavor. So it's not easy, especially when you don't know the details. You don't know if the details are not there because things are not there, or they're just so good. So we don't know. But hopefully we'll see some details from that. For Europe, I think we'll see more visibility in the pre-Exascale machines because they do have projects in pre-Exascale using existing technologies. So you may see some fairly large machines using existing technologies, mostly probably in the US, maybe some from Japan, derivative of Fugaku maybe, but we'll see about that. But there will be sort of from technological standpoint, they will not be really that new. They will be re-exercising the existing technologies. But still, it's good news for Europe because there will be some sizable capacity. But I think there are two most important things. I think there will be a lot of one is, of course, as I already mentioned, there will be a lot of learning experience from this COVID, as any part of society had been, in how we contributed to actually solving these problems, or how we learned to work together, or how we do things in a very accelerated fashion. So those may have some effect on these various programs. We'll see what they will be. Certainly, it has affected us. So we'll see how this. If anything good will come out, well, I wouldn't say good, but if anything positive will come out of this whole crisis, it's to accelerate and improve the way we do supercomputing for the society. And then the other is, when we build machines, it's already done. Because everything has to be, the blueprint has to be there when we actually start to manufacture. So for all intensive purposes, hardware for it. The software is still there's some development work going on, and applications as well. But from a hardware perspective, most of Fugaku design had been hardened in 2017. And we knew most of the characteristics in 18 because we would have a chip we tested like that. We already had simulators. We tested it. We had lots of simulations on the simulator. We had the chip, and we started testing applications from very early on, so we knew exactly how the chip would be made with respect to those applications. And it turns out many of our performance projections were correct. Well, at least to some extent, they were pretty precise. So we're doing the right engineering, but that's more about you doing engineering, and so that's why even before that we really start thinking about what's next, because it's already done with some of the bigger ideas about the machine and a lot of stuff from a couple years ago was mostly engineering. So now that these countries are deploying these very large scale, the Exascale machines, finally, after many years of endeavor, we'll start thinking intensively about what to do next. What are the ideas? I mean, in fact, we're already doing that. But the activity as a whole, in a very holistic fashion, will become pretty prominent, especially in the research space. So some people still may come with wacky ideas, and they may be pretty good, at least partially. And of course, you have to do this really steady engineering, do much more accessible analysis. Now that we have these machines, we have better understanding of applications, like I said. So we have to do the right engineering as well. So there's research. There's still some research because there are some things that serendipitous what was happening. And this time it was mostly AI that happened as an afterthought after we talked about Exascale. So that's why these AI features have been added to the chips. It's in ASIC, in fact, it's in the GPUs and so forth. But we didn't envision that back in 2010. But now it's there. So there will always be some serendipitous elements that will go into these architectures for increased performance. But by and large, so there are some research there. On the other hand, we have to do some really very tight engineering. So those will really start to happen. And become very visible. So next year hopefully will be even more exciting because we will be toying around with these large hits. We're starting to toy around these Exascale machines, and for their own sake, but also toying around to think about the next one. So it should be pretty exciting. 2020 leading up to 21 should be pretty exciting.
Okay, well, looking forward to talk to you in 1 year time then in Frankfurt, hopefully. Yeah.
Yes, I need my sausage and sauerkraut.
Yeah, and the beer. Okay. Yeah.
Beer, yeah. We get beer, but we don't get good sauerkraut.
Yeah, but it's different. It's different if you taste it there than if you taste it here. I mean.
I'm hoping that Europe will reopen its doors and allow Americans to come in. I don't blame them for shutting the gates right now. I'm not sure I even want Americans to come into our hometown until we start growing up and behaving in a responsible way. Yeah. But let's all plan to meet at or near the Marriott and the conference center.
Okay. Thanks very much for this interview.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay, see you.
See you.